Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is the 20th of November, and we have Brent crude oil today trading a little bit up, essentially unchanged at $63.64. It certainly had a bit of a drop off yesterday and sort of struggling to hold that sort of connection to $65. Anytime it seems to get close, it kind of pulls back. We're sort of in $65 as a ceiling rather than $65 as a floor territory. Let's kick off with June Go, Senior Oil Analyst at Sparta Commodities in Singapore. June, your thoughts? I mean, the big news overnight is all things Nvidia, the biggest monster on the stock markets these days. You know, worth trillions of dollars. It outperformed expectations on earnings. Shouldn't the oil markets be part of the celebration? Why are we being left out in the cold?
Well, good morning, Sean, and everyone else on the call. I think, yeah, the market has been very exuberant on AI, tech stocks in general, and the energy market has been lagging. I think we have seen a disconnect. And you're right. Why shouldn't we be celebrating? Because these data centers need the energy, and oil is right there for you to for the data centers. So it could be an undervalued opportunity for energy stocks. But right now, I think fundamentally the world is grappling with an oil glut or a perceived oil glut, and that's the key reason why we are seeing prices where they are today.
Let's go to Dubai. We've got Robin Mills, CEO of Camar Energy. Other big news this week, Robin, is the visit of the Saudi leadership, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in Washington, not only himself, but with a big delegation. Lots of headlines, lots of close proximity to Donald Trump. Your thoughts now, sort of digesting the meeting, has it met your expectations in the way that NVIDIA exceeded the expectations of analysts in its performance? Has this event, has this trip, how has it met or not met your expectations?
I think much as we expected, Sean. I mean, the Saudis are now promising to invest $1 trillion in the US. That's the entire Saudi GDP. So I think we can safely discount that. And many of these promises have been made several times before. Of course, you're spending the same dollar several times to rack up these numbers. So anyway, but it meets Donald Trump's need for some headlines. So mission accomplished on that. And the Saudis achieved some of the things that they wanted on the fighter jets, on the supply of chips. So I guess on nuclear, or the nuclear corporation still doesn't meet all of their requirements, but some progress on getting what they wanted on the civil nuclear side. So yes, I think pretty much as expected, and a lot of kind of warm words and friendship.
I mean, is the fact that the meeting took place at all, that Crown Prince is in Saudi or in Washington, is itself a kind of the achievement rather than a sort of a repeat of maybe the same MOUs and signings that we saw in Riyadh a few months ago when Trump was there, but simply being in the body of the capital of Rome, if you like, that is the achievement, the complete of the rehabilitation of the Crown Prince after some difficult years.
Yeah, well, the Crown Prince faced some awkward questions, as you would expect, but beyond that, it's just as the US stands currently, questions from the media don't have a great impact, right? The relationship with the Trump administration is the key one, and that's clearly very friendly and very strong. So I don't think I think from the point of view of the Crown Prince making a visit to the US is the best possible time.
Paul Hicken, Chief Economist and Editor-in-Chief at Petroleum Economist. With your chief economist hat on, Paul, I mean, where are we at in terms of macro outlook, macro OECD demand, particularly in the US? It seems that what was a sort of a walk in the park to the next Fed cut coming next month now seems to be public headlines of big disagreements down the middle of the Fed membership, the Fed board having different views on things. I mean, where do you think that is, the outlook for the monetary policy, mainly coming out of the Fed, but also elsewhere, and its relevance for the energy markets?
Yes, thanks, Sean, for having me on. And just to want to digress for a second and
Please.
mention something about the whole Saudi and US meeting, which I think what's quite interesting is that they're meeting while COP is going on, and almost COP's been a side note in this whole shebang. And the fact that we were both at ADIPEC, Sean, and energy addition was the big theme of the market. We've had the IEA shift as well, and clearly energy security is very much back on the agenda. And
Top of, I would say.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's very telling that they're doing these kind of deals while COP is going on. So I think it's a very important message at the moment. On terms of where the economy is, I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, we've been in this kind of,
Well, the
demand.
US economy has been the pillar, I mean, between other elements, but ultimately it is the sort of macro pillar of the global economy, at least it has been for some time now, and it looks like it might be on a wobble.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. We've been talking about a wobble, I think, for like almost 18 months,
Yeah.
and it's pretty much been it's continued to hold up. It's kind of
Yeah.
it's one of these things where the market looks a bit like the Russia-Ukraine situation, where we get some positive news out saying there may be a sort of an end to the war, and the markets kind of shrug and go, "Oh, it's great news." There's a little bit of a blip on the market, and then we carry on because it's the kind of markets in a way just kind of resisting kind of this news. We've heard it all before, and the fundamentals are still really, I think, at the moment, what's driving this market. And June mentioned at the beginning, we talk about this potential glut. I mean, the market's in many ways has priced in a lot of this glut. Well, not the glut, but some of this move. We've gone from $80 a barrel at the start of the year and plus to down to early 60s. We're going to probably keep going slowly lower, like the parable of the boiled frog for the market. But I don't think we're going to shift in any sharp way soon.
June, looking at that point, I mean, the US economy, the Fed may or may not cut for different reasons. They're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of labor numbers versus inflation and labor numbers to come this week as well. But where is China at, the other big pillar of this oil market, the outlook for continued buying into China for storage and the sort of the end of the year as we start to map out the year ahead, where China sort of declares its sort of growth target for the year ahead? This might be the first year we've ever seen China target less than 5%.
I think we separate 2 points here. One is the stockpiling activity. I've stated a few times before that it is number one is for energy security, so they will want to stockpile. But number two, it is flat price dependent. So right now, with price coming off, even I think to the 60s number, that's a very favorable point at which China will want to accelerate their stock build, and given that they have the capacity to do that. The second one is on the economy itself.
Just before you go off that, June, capacity to continue to stock build, is that sort of an endless empty bucket that they have?
The reports it's currently on commercial and SPR storage is about at 60% utilization. So there's still another 40% to go.
Wow.
And I recall, right now the base load is about 1.2 billion of storage. There's still a lot more that they can put into those tanks if they wanted to. On top of that, next year there will be another 169 million barrels additional new capacity coming on.
So lots of space, obviously, to continue to grow. And the other
Correct.
point you were going to make?
Yeah, on the China economy itself, we all, I think this year when we started with the tariff tantrums, we were all very worried about where China's economy direction will head to. But I think they have been very resilient, and they are going to be the last man standing in at least in the Asian region, in terms of how the economy is being powered. And of course, there's a lot of help and support from the government to ensure that they don't fail. So I think the
What about
demand
those
for
other big medium economy? I mean, the middle kingdoms, if you like. I mean, Vietnam, Indonesia, all were in very sort of robust economic health before the trade war. The tariffs came down. How have they ended the year? Have they also digested this sort of Trump tantrum, so to speak, and still moving forward, still growing? It hasn't knocked them off.
For Vietnam, I think they have been very good at the bamboo diplomacy, and they have really circumnavigated many of these threats on the tariffs. So their economy is actually doing very well. The rest of the Southeast Asian regions are probably not as capable at this point versus Vietnam, but I believe in general everyone seems to be doing okay. The postulation is what will we experience in 2026? Because perhaps many of these effects are going to be delayed. The tariff effects, maybe we will only start to see them affecting more our region, maybe Q1, Q2 next year instead.
Robin, sort of looking at a more similar end of your macro view of where the region is at, coming again out of the Saudi visit to the kingdom, or to the kingdom, to Washington. I was sort of expecting that it would be more of a punctuation point for this year, in which there's been a lot of turbulence, and that this would kind of bookend it and close the chapter on what was a pretty turbulent year, and sort of move into a new outlook, if you like, from the point of view of sort of wrapping up, particularly the sort of geopolitical stresses in the neighborhood, the war in Iran, the sort of genocide and conflict in Gaza. These still seem unsettled, that perhaps they've been on a pause for maybe even for this trip, so that it could happen in a relative calm. Your sense, as we come to the end of the year, have those been closed? Have we got a new dawn to look forward to, or are all of these unresolved, do you think, and turbulence looms for the region once again in the new year?
Completely unresolved, Sean. Yeah, no, I think maybe we're okay for the rest of the year, but I think there's definitely trouble stored up for next year again. And I think particularly the Israel-Iran confrontation is not finished business by any means, and the US role in that as well. Now, hopefully, will the ceasefire in Gaza hold, or more or less hold? Hopefully, Syria is on the up. Libya is broadly on the up. So there definitely are some points of improvement. But I think the Israel-Iran situation and Iran's relation with its neighbors, that continues to loom, and there's no obvious solution or resolution in sight for that. And I think we should all be ready for another round of conflict sometime next year.
Paul, the other part of that question, if you could pick up on, is the idea that we've seen OPEC Plus, led by Saudi Arabia, deliver a supply increase through the course of this year, and obviously continue to do so until December, and then in the new year they've declared they'll pause that. But ultimately, the why of that has been why they've done it, as there's different views on. But ultimately, one is that as a sort of geopolitical gift to President Trump, that the calms inflation, calms the price at the pump in the US. And maybe now that sort of visit is over, then different thinking might surface. Your thoughts on, as we end the year, OPEC Plus, where their decision making on the why of this output increase into a relatively soft market. Many of the countries in this region now are suffering budget deficits due to the oil price being less than projected in budgets. Where do they go from here, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sean. And I think it's important to recognize that with all these glut prophecies that are coming, well, are here, and with the oil and water and everything, I think it's important to recognize that all those sort of assumptions into 2026 almost sort of remove OPEC Plus from the equation. And it's almost like they're a side note that they've got no agency in this. And obviously they have. And they could easily reverse course. They could easily change tack if prices go way below $60. It's very much within their capability and management to do that. So
I mean, by bringing in another round of cuts, ultimately, I suppose.
yes, exactly, and not to bring the barrels back. So I mean, I think the market sometimes gets over ahead of itself when it's in a bearish trend, or when it's in a bullish trend, it gets over ahead of itself often. And so I think all the sort of theories behind why OPEC Plus, has brought back barrels, Trump, I think compliance and everything else. I mean, yes, that there are.
Finding new baselines seems to be
And a new
sort of
baseline.
logical.
Obviously, it's important, but actually, market structure and we're still in backward. We're still kind of backward in market structure and the price are still the hallmarks of what defines OPEC Plus stability, even if it won't openly admit to that. So where that goes and how prices determine go into 2026 will still be the big influence. And I think what's interesting about when you say about Donald Trump, I mean, he's got the sort of lower crude prices, what he wants, but actually the product prices actually haven't moved because we still have a very tight distillate market. Even gasoline prices haven't really changed much. So it's quite interesting that how that's going to work out as well, because there's still, when refinery turnarounds finish, we're going to still have some of that pent-up demand for all those products.
Let's go to the survey question, which is looking a little at this topic of the outlook vis-a-vis the NVIDIA, where we started our conversation. How will NVIDIA's market-topping earnings impact oil markets over the short term? We're seeing today little reaction, but obviously the equity markets is where it's at. But ultimately, as was made the point by June, that indeed these are the whole outlook for the AI universe. It was one of the top themes at the ADIPEC, the world's largest oil and gas exhibition and conference in Abu Dhabi earlier this month. The AI build out, the AI data farm build out, that it's all multiple of power demand that's going to be required, and inevitably the hydrocarbons and other all energies play their part in that. And NVIDIA is a kind of an affirmation of results that there was a bit of a concern that this was bubbling up into unreality around some of these issues. So you would think this has to be a bullish, maybe over the long term for energy, but short term. But welcome thoughts on this. See if there is a connective tissue between the two. June, there's probably more of a connective tissue for the markets in relation to where Asian buyers are going to go with Russian sanctioned barrels, Iranian sanctioned barrels, a lot of volumes on the water that are accounting are for these sanctioned barrels. Your thoughts on the outlook of where the Asians are going, India and China in particular? Obviously a big 2 years where they've been the biggest buyers of these sanctioned barrels, particularly Russian, but Iranian too, into China. Is that likely to sustain?
So China and India both have different positions. We have China, which doesn't seem to get singled out by Trump when they buy Russian oil, but they are avoiding the purchase, at least on the state-owned refiners and buyers. However, if we are looking at specific, like Yulong, which was UK sanctioned, they are happily absorbing as much ESPO, which is a Russian crude, as much as they can, given that, I'm already sanctioned, so I might as well take sanctioned oil. The impact of the specific sanctions on the terminals in China has also affected the buying process. We're seeing a little bit more delays in the shipments arriving into China. So overall, I think once the workarounds are being found, new discharge ports get used to a new routing of oil, all those will resolve as we move into 2026. Now for India, it's been a lot of out of the 5, there are 7 refined buyers. 5 of them have already outwardly said they have stopped buying Russian crude. We still have Nayara and IOC opening up tenders for that. But don't forget, it's not the Russian crude that is being sanctioned, it's the Russian oil companies that is being sanctioned. So the oil can still flow if they can meet those criteria. And I think India will, at least for now, until the trade deal is done between US and India, they will want to stay away from buying Russian oil for now. But whether the temptation to come back again after all this is done and dusted, I think that would remain to be seen because the discounts are really quite tempting.
Yeah, and getting bigger as the sanctions bite tighter. On that point, Robin, your thoughts on the we have tomorrow is the sanctions implementation on the Russian companies. We've seen the scramble through ADIPEC last week and recent weeks and the acquisition of the Lukoil assets now being sort of up in the air. Your thoughts on where that sanction biting goes vis-a-vis this latest sort of Russian exercise from the US. This time we're really serious. Tomorrow is the deadline, and there's some very real assets going to be stranded.
I think the whole impact of these sanctions depends crucially on enforcement. And, we've seen previous rounds of sanctions from the US that weren't that tightly enforced, didn't have much impact. These sanctions looked very tough. I actually find the US move so far actually more encouraging on the enforcement side in a funny way. Yes, they're kind of offered potentially waivers for Lukoil's operations in Iraq to continue, and that kind of discussion is going on. So, Lukoil is operating West Qurna 2 with 480,000 barrels per day of production. If that is stopped, that's stopped. That makes a huge difference to Iraq and even with kind of global market implications. I think they will find a way to continue those operations. I don't think that West Qurna 2 will actually be closed down. And I think the fact that the US is kind of showing signs of being willing to be constructive on that shows that actually they do mean to enforce the sanctions. They do mean to compel Lukoil to sell to an acceptable buyer in their view. Obviously, they blocked the Gunvor sale. And now we have talk of others. We have talk of maybe it's Exxon, Chevron, ADNOC, maybe others take a look at the Lukoil assets in different parts of the world. But West Qurna 2 is the pivotal one for the oil market and the crown jewel in the portfolio. And the Iraqis certainly can't afford that to stop.
And just to pick up on that, given its local connection, ADNOC as a potential buyer, I mean, obviously with their new international platform, XRG, they do seem to have a big appetite for global assets. Do you think this is there'd be a real contender on some of this stuff?
Yeah, ADNOC has been a lot of market chatter, right? ADNOC has been talked about, but which assets it is there? Lukoil has plenty of other assets. They're in West Africa, they're in Central Asia, so different people want different parts. There's the Carlyle suggestion. Carlyle seems to be more interested in the downstream, the refining and retail assets. That kind of makes sense. Refineries in Bulgaria and so on. So I think we'll see, looks like we'll see a piecemeal sale of the Lukoil assets rather than the kind of the big package to someone like Gunvor.
And just another point I wanted to get your thoughts on the restarting of the Iraqi Turkey pipeline, the ITP. Does that impact the markets, more supply, or does Iraq stay within its quotas? How do you see that flow? I mean, technically that was 400,000 barrels a day or so when it was in full operation. Yeah,
so the practical effect was about 100,000 barrels a day of Kurdish oil production was locked in. Much of it was being produced anyway. It was being sold locally or sent by tanker. So not a huge impact. Yes, there is a little bit of an uplift from Kurdistan now, which is still coming through. The key point on that, I think, is longer term is going to next year when the pipeline treaty potentially will be renewed or completely revised? And then is there a move to unlock a lot more production from Iraq, having a pipeline from the south to the north so that Iraq can export freely some of its southern volume through Turkey? But these are all longer term prospects.
Paul, I wanted to, you mentioned at the beginning there, your opening comment was the fact that COP30 is going on and all of this talk and activities somewhat seems like a sideshow. And indeed, one news overnight was that it would be, the next one will be in Turkey. I think that was some of the news. But I wanted to get your thoughts in the connection of that sort of sideshow narrative and intersected with the announcement last week by the IEA to, again, also in the middle of COP, to essentially revise its whole 5-year declaration of peak oil demand and the energy transition. It was the only gig in town. How do you digest that a week later? Where do you think it's going to impact?
Well, I think what was interesting was the IEA changed its tack, and everyone still puts the boot in on the IEA. Which probably suggests how damaging those. While people think, oh, sideline the IEA, how damaging it was for oil and gas investment over the past 5 years since the La La Land report. So it's. I think you said it, Sean. I mean, where we see, assumptions around the momentum and pendulum has swung, back to oil and gas, particularly over the past. We saw it at ADIPEC with energy addition. Since COVID, we've gone through a multitude of buzzwords. We've gone from energy transition, which was kind of this meaningless phrase.
But yet was powerful and on steroids coming out of Glasgow a few years ago. It seemed like the oil and gas industry wasn't even invited to Glasgow.
Yeah, and then they felt they needed. Then we had sort of being held in the Middle East petrostates, and then now another petrostate in Brazil, and it's almost it's almost become more inconsequential since then. So, you wonder if COP's even fit for purpose now. Or
is the IEA? I mean, the big discussions last year was about the massive divergence between the forecasting of the IEA and of OPEC, very wide apart, and they are again for next year. I think one of the big victims, it seems to me, of this moment is where can you rely on, where is the sort of accurate data, and it's nowhere, I suppose, and everywhere at the same time. Is that a big victim here?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that some of these are scenarios. So I mean, they're not forecasts; they are scenarios. But then you've got to have still plausible scenarios. Otherwise, what's it mean? Like when the IEA came out with the idea that if everyone has group showers, will help save the environment. You've got to base it in some reality, and that's that disconnect, which is often a problem, and people have struggled with. But I think where the market's going in 5-10 years, I mean, it is very uncertain. We technology and policy are very uncertain. We had the hydrogen hype, we've had these kind of clean tech hype, and it hasn't come through. We're now, even electric vehicles, we're there, but we're not there. China seems to be driving you think with the situation in China that we'd still be on that course, but you're right, Sean. It's we can't even get an outlook for. We're in November now, and the IEA and OPEC are still so far apart on their monthly report, which is incredible.
And then we're at the end of the year. I mean, it does seem to be one of the headlines to take away for this year in terms of energy and is the data, the research, the agencies tasked with surfacing data points and consumption and demand and supply and all of its bits and pieces. We've seen earlier in the year Donald Trump firing the head of the statistics department in the U.S. government. We've had the closure of the U.S. government, and now no data points. And
Yeah. On that point, just to add something on that point, which is the markets also become less transparent. In fairness, the markets have become less transparent, at least in the near term. We had all these kind of tanker tracking data, but now with sanctions, people are even more covert in terms of what's going on. We've had a lot of China stock buying, which again isn't so transparent. And you know, when you've got sort of like all this oil and water, for example, and 40% of it is sanctioned crude, it's kind of this idea, well, is that demand? Is that storage? You know, it's like that old poem, water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. You know, and the same for oil. It's like what is oil is actually going to be consumed, and what is oil is actually taken off the market. And I think there's lots of unclear questions this year, which is more so than it's ever been.
Yeah, and as you said at the earlier part of your commentary, at the beginning of for much of the year, the expectation of surplus, the data that was available, the regular sources of data and forecasts that built a narrative of surplus coming with increased supply from OPEC, etc., and then it turns out to be incorrect, at least not yet, at least not in 2025, and so there is I think a breakdown. People can perceive that as agenda driven, or it's just a lot of forecasting with poor data to feed into its models. So anyway, that's a kind of a takeaway for the year. And the IEA decision last week is that it just feeds into that space of uncertainty. And this survey says no impact to bullish. The bears can go home. It'll certainly be worth watching if indeed this big AI big AI bubble, big AI growth does lift all energy boats. It seems on the headlines it should, and yet certainly oil and gas to an extent not participating in the big equity party, at least not in 2025. Robin Mills, thank you so very much. June Go and Paul Hicken, probably the last time we'll have you on this year, as obviously we're winding down. Christmas is coming and the goose is getting fat and there's disruptions in between. So if we don't get you on again, thank you so much. Happy holidays and all of that stuff. And look forward to seeing you all soon. All the best. Have a good rest of the week. Cheers.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.